Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach, and today we have with us Ed Brenegar, who's the creator of the Circle of Impact model of leadership. Ed, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike, for having me.
You're welcome. I'm excited to learn about your Circle of Impact model. I love when people name their proprietary system, and so I want to learn about that. But give us a little bit of your background and what has your entrepreneurial journey been like to this point?
Well, it's a continuing journey, that's for sure. I began my career as a Presbyterian minister and was doing urban ministry in Atlanta and got invited to join a business board as a clergy representative, and I discovered a board that was functioning as a whole. Instead of one person running it and everybody else passively following, this board was 45 people actually working together as one. I said, "Oh,
that's a shocker."
So this is what leadership is all. Yeah, this is what leadership's all about. So I knew then that my shift was. I already knew this was shifting away from traditional parish work and it shifted into the leadership, and that was in the winter of 1984. And I've been going hard at trying to understand the nature of leadership and applying it to people's lives and people's businesses and communities ever since. And the Circle of Impact was a product of having started a consulting practice in the mid-90s, and I began to see patterns of behaviors in the wide spectrum of organizations that I was serving. That said, okay, there are three things here that always seem to crop up as problems. And one is the lack of clarity about their ideas, lack of clarity about their purpose, their mission, their values. When they talk about vision, it's something very vague. And so that's a problem. And the second set of behaviors that I saw that were problematic was that there was not a whole lot of respect and trust in many of these places. The way I would describe it is all these relationships are simply like monetary exchanges. They were exchanging service and they were exchanging work, but there was really not a deep core of respect and trust exhibited between people because it just wasn't interested. And the bigger problem was the lack of awareness of actually how organizational structures affect people and how they function. And the way I would describe that is that if you were trying to describe water to a fish, they would not understand what you're talking about. And I see it as the same thing with organizations. How do you describe an organization to someone who's in the middle of it? And so I began to try to figure out a way to apply this model to organizations and people in all kinds of situations, both from a planning perspective, strategic planning perspective, but also from a problem-solving perspective. And that's and I've been doing that for now over a quarter century.
Wow. Well, it's like the scripture, the steps of a righteous man are ordered by the Lord. And obviously your steps were ordered to spend your time in the ministry as well as now moving into probably still there's times that you minister in the business world, but you're now ministering in the realm of bringing organizations more clarity. I think that is wonderful and spectacular.
Yeah. And what I see, Mike, is that all organizations are the same, regardless of what kind they are. Doesn't matter what size they are. They could be a church, it could be a corporation, it could be a local government, a school, a nonprofit organization. It could be any of those, and they all have the same sets of problems that they have to address, and that's a lot of what I've been dealing with. And
when you were saying that you started noticing patterns, I find that curious and interesting because I think that the busier we stay in life, because life gets busier and busier, the busier we are, the more focused on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And sometimes we miss what's right in front of us. So talk a little bit about how you started noticing patterns and started putting those together into your circle.
Well, it started probably when I was in high school. I was, and I think this is just the way I'm wired. There's this analytical side to me. So I'm wired to see these patterns. And I saw patterns of behavior from adults as a high school kid that said, this doesn't make sense. And some of it had to do, growing up in North Carolina in the South and having to deal with race as a part of the issue of growing up in a segregated community and a segregated school system in the 1960s. And then having an African-American football coach and seeing what racism actually looks like in the practical sense. I saw those behaviors, and a lot of that had to do with has the lack of respect, but also had to do with a lot of a lack of self-awareness that people have about how they were actually coming across to people and what they were trying to do, and their fear of change and their fear of kind of being seen for, say, being a fraud or seen for being inadequate. All those kinds of things I was seeing from early on. I saw it all the way through college. Went through graduate school, went through seminary, went into church work, served two churches, and realized, I was really oriented around creating change. And I was seeing these things. Then I went and I worked at a college for 7 years. Same thing. It was
patterns.
It was patterns. And a pattern simply is a phenomenon that is repeated over and over and over again. And then when you can see that in different contexts, they don't have any relation to each other. You say, "Oh, there's something really solid here. Something that's real," and I needed to kind of move in on that. Now, I created the model in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I wrote a book on this, but it took me 15 years to get to writing the book because I wanted to make sure that it was an airtight model, that it actually worked in every situation that I can imagine. And that's what I discovered. And that's when I sat down and I spent about 63 years writing a book. And so the Circle of Impact, Taking Personal Initiative to Ignite Change, is the book that it emerged from all of this study, all of this reflection, all of this observation, all of these projects that I did with all these different groups, and that's the kind of the sum total of what I knew when I wrote the book. Now, Since then, I've learned a whole lot more, but that's the way we are, isn't it?
Well, noticing all of those things through different even circumstances, the word transitions comes to mind because people individually or corporately need to notice and make transitions. Talk a little bit about what types of transitions people experience currently, personally and professionally, how it affects organizations, communities, and how I feel like when I speak of the word transition, you need to not look at it like, oh my word, it's this big change and now my world is, no, it's just pivoting and normal, and it's just part of life, because no matter what transition we think about, you think about the past of, 9/11, that's a transition in the way we thought of things. And then, there was the economic crisis of 2007, 8, 9, 10. That was a change. And then there's COVID. And you know what? There's going to be some other kind of transition that we deal with personally that even creeps over into our professional life. So talk a little bit about that, how organizations deal with transition.
Well, I see transition as different than change. I see transition as a process. It's unfolding. And change is just the moments within that transition that something is happening. I have a set of guiding principles for the Circle of Impact, and one of those is that we are all in transition, every one of us, all the time. But we also often do not see that. And so I've incorporated that idea into a set of questions that I call the 5 questions that everyone must ask. And if people ask these questions on a regular basis, they'll find some clarity. But the first question is, what has changed? How are we in transition? And when I first kind of grabbed hold of this question, I was telling people, let's look back 18 months or 2 years to some point where you recognize that you are beginning to go through some kind of change, some kind of transition. It may be a sense within you that something needs to change that you're unclear of at this point. And so you want to go back to that moment in time when you had that first inclination that you're in transition, and then you want to see if you can identify those moments from that point on up to today, all those moments where you had that same sense of what was going on. So now the question is, what was actually going on in those moments where you had that sense of being in transition? And the way we get at this is to say, we're always in transition, but the question is, where is this transition taking me?
Yeah.
And so I want people to focus on, not on what they're going to do. I'd rather have them focus on, well, what is the impact that I want to have in whatever the next thing I'm going to do? And impact is simply, what is the change that I want to create that makes a difference, that matters?
Yes.
Because when you begin to ask that question, it's actually a simpler question than, so what am I going to do? Because oftentimes we end up doing a whole lot of stuff we don't need to do.
I've heard it in marketing. I've heard it said when you read through a website or a marketing copy to make sure that it's what you want your message to be, you need to read it through the eyes and ears of so what. Like if your headline says X, so what? If your prospects or your target audience reads that, so what? Well, what you just said makes me think of something similar where it's like, okay, I don't like this, or this is transition, or this is, what am I going to do about it? Because if I like it, I want more of it. So what can I do to continue that? If I don't like this situation, what am I going to do to adjust or change or pivot? So I think asking ourselves the right questions is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, it really is. And when you ask the same questions over and over again, you begin to see the patterns. These patterns begin to share themselves. Oh, I continue to do the same thing over and over again. So these questions have been out there. They've been available online for 2 decades almost. And I got a call. This is probably 15 years ago. I got a call from a guy that I had gotten to know in Jamaica. And he was an emotional intelligence consultant and coach, and he was primarily working with local governments throughout the Caribbean. He was West African who had been trained at the London School of Economics and ended up in Jamaica. And he had taken these 5 questions and had begun to ask them every Sunday night for the next week. And during the year previous to the moment he called me, he said he'd been asking that every week, and the result was that his EQ website had become the most visited in the world. And he attributed to being really clear about the impact he wanted to have and the changes that he was going to have to make for that to happen. And unfortunately, within 2 years, he passed away from, I think it was a heart attack. So he didn't have the time to really nurture this idea much, much longer so we could really see 15 years down the road where this had taken him, because he was going to be a real star in the world, I thought, because of his commitment to the emotional intelligence world.
Wow. Well, that just goes to show that was a technique that worked. And you know what? Life is short, life is brief, and stop and smell the roses. And don't let that, I forget who said this quote or this concept, but it's kind of like, where's the most, I don't know, where do you find the most missed opportunities? And people are like, oh, it's here. Nope, it's in the cemetery, because these missed opportunities are people that let things die with them and never got them out and put it into motion. So I think that's something that we can all take to heart is, what is kind of that prompting that we can be doing, or even just a compliment to someone, or what? I'm reading a book right now called Whale Done, which is a fictional story about how a business consultant goes and learns from how trainers of Shamu at SeaWorld train these big whales, and how he can translate that into corporate life. And one of the things is rewarding behavior you want to see repeated. Well, maybe there's just someone in your organization that's doing something good, and you want to call that out. Don't call it out when it's bad. Praise in public and reprimand in private. So let's solve a problem using your circle of impact. What would that look like?
Well, let's identify. First of all, let's identify the problem. What kind of problem do we want to solve right now in the next 2 minutes? I mean, that's the way I look at this. So. Let's solve this problem. People's lives were totally disrupted by the pandemic and the lockdowns and the mandates and all of that. Okay. So I'm not interested in talking about the politics and the sociology and all of that. the health side of that. I'm only interested in how do people respond to that radical change in their lifestyle, and that is the problem. So first of all, we have to ask the question: what kind of problem is this? Is this a problem where I'm not clear about what's going on? Is this a problem because my relationships with people are now broken and I need to fix those? Or is this a problem where the structure of my life or the structure of my business is inadequate for what we're now going through? And you would, if we were solving this problem in real life, in real time, we would choose one of those. And those three ideas are the three dimensions of the circle of impact. So let's just say that the problem is one of clarity, that we don't know what we're supposed to do now that we're in the pandemic world. And so the principle here is that the solution to a problem is not in the problem itself. It's in the resources that you bring to the problem. So we have this lack of clarity about what am I supposed to do. So what we do is we elevate or activate our relationships with people, and we go look at the structure of our organization to see how it can change to actually elevate our sense of purpose, our sense of opportunity for impact, our sense of what we now have the opportunity to do that we didn't have before the pandemic started. So we talk to people and they say, well, I need this and I need help in this way. And I said, okay, we can help. We can talk about this and we can figure out a way for you to change that thing. So now I've reached a point of clarity about I can help this person. Okay. And now I'm going to go start a program to go help that person. And this is exactly what I did, Mike, with the pandemic. So I had begun to go to Africa to do leadership training. I arrived back on March 1st of last year. A week later, the pandemic is declared. We're all kind of going to be in our homes for an unknown period of time. And I said, so what am I going to do? So I said, I'm going to start writing about the things that people have been talking to me about, the questions they have, the stories they tell me, the situations that they present to me. All of these are representations of the transitions that they're in. So I'm going to write about that. So last year I wrote 5 little short books. And then this year I wrote 2 little short books. And they're available on Amazon. And so they're helpful for people to think through various things. In July, but one of the guys that I had been talking to is a pastor of a church in Uganda. And several times last year, we were in conversation about the problem of feeding his people, feeding the people in his community. He says they didn't have enough food. There were people that were starving. And what should he do? And he took some steps. He contacted local government. He went and leased land to go grow some food. I mean, he did this sort of thing. And then this summer I said, well, why don't we try to build some relationships where you and someone else actually are working together to solve this problem of food. And so there was another fellow who I had also met named David. So David and Emmanuel and I formed a little network in July. And so we're beginning, we've been talking about how do we solve the problems that they have. Now, David runs an orphanage. Emmanuel has a church. Different worlds, but yet the same problem. And so what we did was we solved the problem that they have for communication. Then we created a little structure for them to actually support that communication so that they can be clear about how they can solve their problem. Hope that makes sense.
It totally does. And I think when you can look at a problem from the external looking in and bring in different perspectives from either your own outside looking in or either other colleagues from different, like what you just described, different industries, church, and many times someone can go, oh, well, you wouldn't really understand. You're in a position of leadership in a company. This is a spiritual issue, or this is a feeding my country issue. But you never know what backgrounds people bring. So I love that idea of kind of like the mastermind, bringing everyone together for one purpose, clearly defining the problem and moving forward with the solution. So I think that is spectacular, Ed. So let's wrap up with this. What's the the best way that someone could reach out, learn more about your circle of impact, pick up a copy of your book, and connect with you?
Well, the easiest way is to go through my website, edbrenegar.com. There are places to link. You can connect there, and it'll send me an email letting me know that you're want to talk to me. It will also sign you up for my newsletter. Or you can email me at edbrenegar.com, and we can talk. And if people are really interested in doing something beyond simply having a conversation, I have created a little program called the Global Impact Network, and I have a Survey Monkey survey inquiry thing. So if people are interested in actually wanting to talk to me about what their impact and their need for more networking in their work, I'm glad to talk with them about that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ed. That's really great. And I'll make sure that your website is linked in the show notes so people can just click right on that and reach out and connect with you. So thank you so much for coming on. It was wonderful learning about you and your Circle of Impact model of leadership.
Thank you, Mike. It was great to be with you.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.